In this question, we are supposed to ask the user to enter 100 integers one at a time. After the user has entered all of the integers, we're supposed to print the total number of negative integers, the total number of odd integers, and the total number of integers that were divisible by 5. For example, if the sequence 5, -2, 4, -15, 6, 10 was entered, which is odd, which is strange because that's not 100 integers. But I guess if we are to imagine that only those were entered, the program should first output 2, since -2 and -15 are negative, meaning they're two negative numbers. Then output 2, since 5 and -15 are both odd. And then output 3, since 5, -15, and 10 are divisible by 5. So this is a good setting to use a for loop because we know we want to loop 100 times. We'll probably use range as a tool to control that, like range 100 would be an iterator that would cause our for loop to go 100 times. We're going to want to have counters using the accumulator pattern to look for the total number of negative numbers, the total number of odd numbers, and things that were divisible by 5. So we'll want to have the accumulator pattern with some conditionals, right? Increment the counter only if you just saw a negative number. Increment the counter only if you just saw an odd number. Things like that. So we can start coding our basic loop to say that it has to be for something in range 100. What are we doing in the for loop? Well, we're prompting the user for an integer. I don't really know the loop iterator, like the name of the loop iterator I'd have, so I'm low imagination. When I don't know what I'll do with it, I'll just call it I. So for I in range 100, I want to prompt the user. So I'd have, I'm just going to call it num to say, hey, I'll get an integer from the user using input. Now I want to see if that is negative or not and try to count all the negative ones. So if num is negative, less than 0, I will do something like I'll keep track of the total negative as being something I'll make bigger. But because I'm using total negative, then I have to initialize total negative. And I'll start it at 0. That's a basic counting pattern that we've seen before. Like initialize it to 0 and then increment it by 1 in the scenario where you want to. The total number of odd integers. Well, I have to use an independent if statement. So this would not be the right case where I would want to use an else or an elif, because something can be both odd and negative, as we saw in the example. So what does it mean to be odd? Well, it just means that it's not evenly divisible by 2. So this is a nice use of modulo. If num mod 2 is something other than 0, this is the not equals 0. That means it's not evenly divisible by 2. Then I'll increment the total odd. And I'll again have to initialize that. This looks like my indentation is going kind of wonky, but I can just draw a little line like that so that it becomes clear to anyone who might read it what the indentation means when I'm doing it pen and paper. All right, now I also do divisibility by 5. Again, it's an independent if statement because there might be a relationship with other things, but I know it's safer. So to me, I don't want to reason about if it's possible. Oh yeah, it's easier to. It can be both even and odd. It can be both divisible by 5 and either positive or negative and either even or odd. So here we have negative 15 and 10 of examples. So I need an independent if. So divisibility by 5 is a lot like divisibility by 2. I just say, hey, if I try to divide it by 5 and it is divisible by 5, meaning I get 0 remainder, then increment a counter for it. I'll say the total 5 equals t 5 plus 1. And again, I need to initialize t5 equals 0. Then at the very end, right out here at the same, this would be outside the for loop. I could print those three things. So I would be printing t neg, t odd, t5. The program should first output 2, then output 2, then output 3. Maybe at one of 3 different print statements, but I feel like this is asked that it wasn't specific enough and there was no sample output. So I feel like this meets what was asked in the problem.